Greetings, fellow Gravity Falls fans. My name is SirOrin. I've been around since the show first aired, and I've always wanted to do a theory video. I know I've waited a long time and the show is almost over, but I figured, why not? This video's topic will be breaking down the trailer for A Tale of Two Stands, a special 30-minute no commercial break episode. I'm sure many of you have seen Vailskeebum's breakdown, and it's not bad, but he's definitely off of some stuff, so allow me to set you straight. The trailer starts off with an image Alex has already shared with us. Stanley and Stanford discovering an old shipwreck on Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey. The triangular hole, as far as I'm concerned, holds no meaning. Just because something's a triangle doesn't necessarily mean it's connected to Bill Cipher. In this next scene, we see them naming the boat Stan o' War, a reference to Uncle Stan's boat in Ledger the Gobblewonker. I wonder where he keeps his boat these days. Though the boat in the promo is not necessarily the same boat. Also, based on the expressions and the next image we get flashed, we can assume Stanley is getting frustrated about Stanford being a polydactyl. For, as I said, we get flashed a quick look at Stanford's up-close hand. This is most likely the very beginning of Stan's tale, right before the twins find the shipwreck where they are just messing around. I see people often mirroring the twins' relationship to different Mabels, and while there will be some similarities, I think these are two completely different personalities, close in a different way and hostile in a different way. The next clip gives us a peek at the Pines twins' room, showing possibly their father's boxing gloves, since we know they were only later signed up for boxing. We can spot a goofy Alex Hirsch on the cover of a magazine, as well as a Boy Scouts bag, an 8-ball, and most importantly, proof of who is who. Now, right after watching Out What He Seems, I knew immediately who was who. Stanley was the grandfather, and Stanford, the author, was the great-uncle. When Stanford went missing, Stanley, and wasn't mad at the time, faked his own death to assume the identity of his brother. This all makes sense considering Alex has stated he used to stay the summer with his grandpa Stan, which Grunkle Stan turns out to actually be. Even though the evidence was all there, some people doubted this, but now no one can argue with the evidence of the handprints. We leap to later in the episode where Stanford is catching floating eyeballs to sketch for the journal. Most likely, unlike what Vailskeebum said, this is just a quick scene of a lengthy montage where the author catches and sketches creatures for the journals, but then again I can't promise any details. Now there are a few things I have to address with this next clip. The way Stanley looks as a kid in this episode is completely different than how he looks in Dreamscaperers. For example, as a kid he was wearing glasses in Dreamscaperers, but in A Tale of Two Stands, no glasses. Not that this is entirely important to the plot, just interesting. For the look of this teenage Stanley is different than the look of teenage Stanley in Dreamscaperers, if you remember the nerdy guy who punched a man in the face during movie theater line. Instead, this look resembles young adult Stan in Boy is Crazy, when he is dancing with Carla McCurkle. Not to get off topic, but speaking of Carla, we're led to believe Stanley had a wife. I mean, we know for a fact he had a kid, Dipper Mabel's father. We can also spot a wedding, or at least an engagement ring, in Stanley's dresser from Karaoke. It'll be interesting if this is touched upon in the episode. As I was saying about this image though, teenage Stanley has dropped his nerdy look and adopts the look of young adult Stan from Boys Crazy. Another thing to know about this image is that Stanley is the one who is left behind, so to speak, by Stanford. In lots of the fan art I've seen, Stanley is always the one to leave nerdy Stanford behind as he goes on through life. We can clearly see it's the opposite. Stanford is an extremely smart student and is on a whole nother level in comparison to Stanley. Moving on. This scene is an assumed argument between Stanley and his father, for we can recognize the coat sleeve shoving him to the ground. And it's interesting to see Dipper and Mabel getting along together here, as they are both seem to be taking one another's side, and for the time being forgetting the broken trust of Not What He Seems. In this exciting clip, we see Fiddleford and Stanford building the universe portal underneath the shack. It appears McGucket is doing a great job as one of the power sources suddenly blasts on. It'll be interesting watching how the scene pans out. In this next clip we see Stanley, probably near the very end of his tale, as the Grunkle Stan we know him to be. It is doubtful he is discovering the portal for the first time. Most likely he is just checking up on it, seeing if there's anything he can do to get it turned back on. In fact, were it not for his work clothes, rather if he was wearing his underwear, I would think that this is the scene directly after the end of Tourist Trap, where we see Stanley entering the vending machine for the first time. But as I said, because of his attire, this will probably not be the case. Here we see conman Stanley in disguise as Steve Pinington, trying to make a sale through a TV commercial. And then the very same Mr. Pinington leaving town in a hurry. In the next scene, we have Stanford making journal number 1, something I've been waiting a very long time to see. And following that, we have a scene where, of course, Dipper is being a fanboy about the author. This next clip will most likely be the climax of the tale, and very, very important. The first time the portal is tested for real. From an image in the Society of the Blind Eye, we see two figures letting out a third figure on a rope into the universe portal. So this scene could be one of two things. First, Stanley agrees or wants to test the portal, and Fiddleford is holding the guideline he is tied to when he suddenly has trouble with it. Or it could just be that Fiddleford gets accidentally entangled with the rope, and Stanley has nothing to do with it. Either way, we see Fiddleford get jerked towards the portal, and Stanford rushes to grab it and save him. This could just be a mini-climax, which is most likely, or the scene when the author gets stranded on the wrong side of the portal. Fiddleford states in Society of the Blind Eye he had quit the project, but still lay awake at night, horrified with what he had helped build. This makes it sound like Fiddleford quit the project before Stanford had the accident with it, though it could be very well perceived in a number of different ways. This next scene looks like the end of the episode, as we can see they are all out of the basement and watching as a cop car pulls up to the shack. Here we see Stanford looking at his old bedroom, which is Seuss's current bedroom. This next scene is disconcerting, as we see the author put in an angry light. Perhaps simply put off by what has happened in the last 30 years, or something else. I have a slight feeling, but not entirely, that the author, Stanford, will be the real main villain of the show, which Alex has told us about. I have little claim to back this theory up, and don't hold fast to it, but I certainly see it as a possibility. Moving on to a scene I'm extremely excited about, the treant. Now, this giant forest creature is actually one of the first creatures we saw in Gravity Falls. Its foot appeared in a poster for the show, and I've oftentimes wondered if it would ever make an appearance. And now we have our answer. I doubt we'll see much more than it grabbing and crushing this car, but it's possible. We're also led to believe that this car belongs to Stanford, though obviously not for long. I can actually see him arriving in Gravity Falls, parking, and then having the tree creature destroy it as soon as he walks away, simply as a cameo to the poster. In this scene, we have Seuss demanding that Stanley's story should line up with his fanfiction of Stan. Thus, the code in Dipper and Mabel's Guide to the Unexplained, Seuss secretly writes fanfic about Stan. This is also picking fun at all the fans and crazy fanfictions they have written. We are now flashed a series of rapid images. The first is what I'm assuming to be Stanford arriving in the quaint town of Gravity Falls, Oregon for the very first time. Next we see a young adult Stanford with a partially built mystery shack in the background. Perhaps we'll get some insight on why the shack is so large, if not originally a tourist trap, and why, when Stanley took over, he added the Bill Cipher decorations. Speaking of which, where does Bill Cipher play into this episode? It seems likely he'll make an appearance, but then again I'm not so sure. The last thing to note about this image is the teenage Dan Corduroy in the background actually doing the building of the shack. I'm curious as to if we'll catch a glimpse of Wendy's mother in this episode as well. Also, if Manly Dan helped to build the mystery shack, does he know the secret rooms beneath it? This is something to think about. Here we have Stanley not doing so well at a payphone in an unknown location. It is possible that Stanley is a wanted man calling his brother for a place to stay. Also, we can see what looks to be a brown car in the background, so maybe the author doesn't own this car after all. Just things to think about. Moving on, we have an adult Stanley with a ponytail approaching the shack in the dead of winter. A very unusual look for the summer tale of Gravity Falls. We can assume this is around the time he broke out of a Colombian prison and is now fleeing to the shack for shelter, or possibly revenge, though for what I don't know. The one thing we do know is that the brothers don't seem to be on good terms. For in the next image we can see an angry Stanford apparently interrogating a ponytailed Stanley. And then after that, Stanley trying to pry the journal from Stanford's hands. Obviously a climax of sorts in the episode. Remember, when Dipper reads, "I have to hide this journal before he finds it," remember, in Gravity Falls there's no one you can trust. What if the author hid the journal so that Stanley couldn't find them? This would make sense, other than the bit in the beginning about "I'm being watched," especially the comment about broken trust. Would Stanley be watching Stanford? These are all important questions to ask yourselves. I'll come back to this later, but for now, I'll move on. In this next frame, things calm down a bit, as we see Stanford and Stanley in high school. Stanford appears to be using the same pen Grunkle Stanley uses to this day, and of course studying profusely, while Stanley sits at a beat-up desk snacking on toffee peanuts, a throwback to the code which told us they're his favorite snack, and paying no attention whatsoever. We then see the shack the same way we saw in Time Traveler's Pig, only it's not winter. It's a fair guess we will see the time-traveling part of this episode, but this time from the author's point of view. In this scene, though, we can see the portal being started up for the first and possibly last time. In this clip, we have Fiddleford playing banjo in what looks like a garage, possibly his own, as well as the prototype of the laptop. The next image shows Schmebylock posing so that the author can sketch him into journal number 3, which means if he is writing journal 3, this is leading up to him hiding the journals. Now, another very interesting aspect of this episode is seeing how Stanford and Fiddleford will go about building the bunker, and whether or not he'll spend a lot of time down there. As far as we can tell, we've caught no glimpse of it, which makes you wonder how important a role the catastrophe will really play. Small, because they haven't mentioned it, or large, because they've kept it a secret. In the second to last image, we can see Stanley crossing off the states he's abandoned, but can't quite tell his age. One of the last images where Flash is one of the most important. Throughout the second season, Dipper is referred to as Corkboard of Mysteries, who was under the assumption that all the mysteries in the town were connected to who wrote the journals. And now we see who wrote the journals questioning that all the mysteries of the town are connected to something even greater. What is this greater force? A main villain? The Royal Order of the Holy Mackerel? The catastrophe that the bunker called for to be built? Or perhaps what lies behind that door beneath the mystery shack? Hopefully we'll finally get some answers on July 13th. What do you think? Please let me know what you think of some of my theories and share some of your own. And finally, would you like to see more videos from me in the future? Also be sure to check out Douglas McCrowell's breakdown coming soon on his YouTube channel, The Royal Order of the Holy Mackerel. You can be sure that anything I missed, he'll definitely cover. Thanks for watching.